Conflict resolution is the best way to grow in integrity. Conflict resolution, the best way that one can grow in integrity. Let's talk a little bit about it. Conflict is one of those human experiences that we all have. It's actually inevitable that we are going to experience conflict. By very nature of our existence, we are going to have conflict at some point. This is because we're all so different. We're all so unique. We're so, there's no clone of a human being that is exactly the same way as the next person. It's kind of like our fingerprints. Our fingerprints are unique in their design and they make us us, in our unique way. In the same way, our expression of who we are is so different. It's interesting, even for parents, those of you who are parents, knowing when you have your kids that you don't have control over how they're going to evolve and become into their themness. So even amongst my 3 kids, there's such diverse differences in their personalities and the way that they're growing up to be, and they're so different from myself. It's not like they're like me inherently. They have their themness, and so we're all so diverse and different, and with such a varied background of diversity in our humanity, at some point we're most likely going to experience that setting where we have different interests, different values, different aims that we're shooting for. And when those clash, there's conflict. So conflict, inevitable. As human beings, it is one of those maxims. Right up there with taxes, there's going to be conflict. And we can't avoid it. We have to experience and go through it. And for most of us, it's not fun. We don't like conflict. We try to minimize it. We try to avoid it. We have many ways of trying to handle it that are poor. For many of us, we try to pretend. We try to pretend it's not there. We try to ignore it. We try to wish it away. We try to sweep it underneath the rug, proverbially, there's that word. For others, we deal with it in different ways that still are poor. We react to it. We explode when it happens. We feel debilitated by it. It's not an easy thing to navigate through conflict. And it's not one of those things that most of us have learned specifically how to address when we're young in healthy ways. So we imbibe ways and forms that we've observed of how we can work through it or deal with it in the moment. And yet many of these ways are insufficient for helping us address to the core what we need to address when it comes to conflict. But today, we are going to talk about conflict resolution. How can we resolve conflict in helpful ways, especially through the lens of integrity? And this is why I start off by saying that conflict resolution is the best way for one to grow in integrity. The best way, because it's inevitable, because it's challenging, but because it also causes us to dig deep to be able to say, how can we experience something better with this experience that is not fun? Most of us don't like conflict. We don't want to have to experience it. If we could choose, we would not go through it. And yet the fact is we must learn to address and deal with conflicts in healthy ways so that we can experience something beautiful in our sense of community. So that's why I say conflict resolution, the best way to grow in integrity, for it helps us to deal with it and to face it. It reminds us that we are equally flawed human beings like those we're in conflict with. And on that premise, that we should extend fairness, we should extend respectfulness, and we should also extend honesty as we try to deal with conflict. We should address it head on. And that takes courage, but we should do it in this with these commitments that integrity ushers us towards, of honesty, of respectfulness, and of fairness. So conflict resolution provides us the opportunity, the prime opportunity to display integrity through our actions, because these actions actually didn't start off as actions. They began with internal commitments that we imbibed. When we made our commitments to walk with integrity, we made some internal commitments that propel our external actions. And that's why conflict resolution and the actions we're about to explore together are the prime place for us to be able to reflect on and say, this is really a big deal, because it starts off with what we committed to inside first. These elements of fairness, of dealing with each other respectfully in the midst of conflict, even though it doesn't feel like we want to, of being honest and fair. These are beautiful commitments. These are critical commitments for us to be able to see something beautiful coming out of our attempts to deal with conflict when it arises. And it will arise. If you haven't experienced it, you are going to experience it. It requires us to be courageous as we approach conflict with each other and trying to address and resolve it. That takes massive guts. That takes courageousness on an epic scale, one worthwhile celebrating and acknowledging and saying, this is a beautiful thing when one sees it. But here's some other elements that conflict resolution requires of us. Conflict resolution gives us the opportunity to work on our communication skills. You know, I know communication is so important, especially when we're in relationships with each other, whether platonically or romantically, whether it's business or personal. Communication is a critical point that most of us stumble and wrestle with, because we're like, this takes a lot of work. And because communication takes a lot of work, we sort of take as many shortcuts as we can when it comes to communication. And then we create more settings where conflict can arise because we don't practice, we don't work on, we don't intentionally give ourselves to the art of learning how to communicate with each other well. But communication, especially in conflict resolution, is so important. And my question is, how do we expect to deal with conflict head on when we haven't been working on our communication skills already beforehand? Communication skills are just necessary whether things are good or not good. Like, we just need to be on point, working ongoing on our communication abilities with one another. But conflict resolution requires us to have good communication skills. And part of this involves actively listening to each other, especially in the midst of conflict. When we're in conflict, what tends to happen is, when we're in conflict, we want to be heard. We want to sort of dominate. We want to have our perspectives taking in the limelight because we are so concerned about winning. We're so concerned about having our way, and we're so concerned about making sure our needs are being met. But communication skills, it requires us also to listen. And that's a difficult thing when your emotions are riled up, when you are just sort of hyped up and you want a certain end. It takes a lot of restraint to say, let me just pause. Let me also remember there's another person here in front of me who also has a different perspective. And let me first of all give myself to listening first. The good book would say something along the lines of be slow to speak and quick to listen. And I think that's a really helpful thing to listen actively, to listen intentionally and say, what is this person saying? I'm going to put my desire and need to communicate first on hold so that I can give fairness and respect to this individual by actively listening to their perspective and seeing, is there something here that I should be considering? Is there a way that I can understand them better from what they're sharing? Let me just give myself fully to listening actively, and then following by understanding their perspectives. As you're listening actively, you're trying to say, where are they coming from? And am I treating their perspectives fairly by listening actively and trying to understand what they're saying? And even as I try to understand their perspective, am I also giving that indication that I'm not rushing them, that I'm not sort of dismissing their perspective, because we're equal humans. We are equal in our humanity. We're equal in our flawedness. We're trying to figure this out. We both have contributions here, and we're trying to understand each other. And then when it's your turn to share or to express your concerns, are you expressing yourself clearly? Are you doing so also respectfully? Are you blasting them? Are you accusing them? Or are you saying, here's my perception of how this happened, and here is what I perceive may have been your intentions. I'm not saying it was, but I'm just guessing that it might have been, or it seemed to me. And I would love that feedback. Is there that respectful extension as you express yourself clearly? These are some valuable skills in conflict resolution. Already, like in this little chunk that I've shared with you already, are some of the heavyweight hitters of how one can approach conflict in a way that's redemptive, in a way that's hopeful, in a way that isn't intimidating. Of course, it does take courage to get to this place, but it's one worthwhile stumbling your way towards. Really critical. So conflict resolution gives us those opportunities to work on our communication skills, which is the backbone of our connections and relationships with each other and community. Communication, so understatedly important, and yet we can't avoid it. Furthermore, conflict resolution teaches us to take responsibility for our actions in the conflict. Many times we want to show up and we want to blast the other person because their contribution is so glaringly obvious to us, and we want them to understand that they were the ones who carry, if not all, at least the primary weight of responsibility. And so we want them to feel that. Conflict often arises from misunderstandings or miscommunication, and it's so easy for us to point the finger and blame someone else. But in conflict resolution, the process requires us to not only be aware of their contributions, but also to own our own. To own our own and not to minimize what our part was. And this is really important because it's a humble step to take. To be able to say, I recognize that I'm also a player in this conflict, whether intentionally or unintentionally, and how can I be willing to take responsibility, take ownership for my contribution in a way that's unapologetic, in a way that's unhindered, in a way that isn't restrictive and saying, oh, it wasn't that bad. You know how we minimize our contributions sometimes when we say, come on, that's not a big deal. No, how can I say this is significant and I'm going to take ownership for that? So conflict resolution requires us to take ownership of our part and to contribute in finding some potential solutions in how we're going to go forward. This is where we are working on how accountable we are. This path of integrity requires us to be honest with ourselves and to take accountability for our actions and to take steps, reasonable and realistic steps to improving and not doing those contributions again. What does that look like? In acknowledging and saying, hey, I see that I respond in a way that I am not happy about, and I'm going to be working on this. It's not going to be instantaneous. I'm going to have a few more fumbles along the way, but I'm going to commit to keep on working on this. So please be patient with me while I work on this. I'm going to make some more mistakes. That's the reality of it. I'm going to try and work my way to diminishing expressions in this category, for example. So how do we take responsibility and accountability for our contribution in the midst of conflict, even as we engage with those that we're in conflict with? How can we take that? Doing so builds up our credibility to say we are being honest in the way that we're assessing the effects, the affects of the conflict that you're both experiencing. By now, you might see you're deep in the midst of conflict resolution as you're practicing how to work on your communication skills, being respectful and being fair and being transparent, and in addition to that, you're also like trying to take responsibility of your own actions, which is like these steps already. If you've only like tracked with me so far, and you're applying these, this is already like massive courage on display. Kudos to you. It's something beautiful to behold when conflict is handled in really competent ways this way. It's such a pleasure. It's such a pleasure when you know you're in the midst of conflict resolution because something happened and you're trying to make things right. And these steps alone are just going to carry you in such an affirmative way that in the midst of the conflict resolution, there's a strong resonance that's building between you and the other party that you're trying to resolve this conflict with that is just so redemptive and beautiful. It's amazing. But still, one more element that I want to share with you in relation to how conflict resolution enhances and magnifies integrity that we are growing into. And that's conflict resolution helps to develop empathy, which is the ability, of course, to understand or share someone else's feelings and experiences. Conflict resolution helps us to develop and to work on our empathy skills. Not only are we communicating as best as we can, not only are we taking responsibility for our actions, but we're also trying to understand what was it like to be in your shoes and to experience a conflict from your side. In essence, what you're doing, dear listener, is you're giving someone their humanity back when you say, can I understand a little bit more about what your perspective or experience in this was? And that is so critically mind-blowing. It's when conflict arises, it's usually because of a difference of opinion or difference in value that you had with someone and in the way that you guys expressed it. And it's so easy for us to be dismissive and say, your feelings don't count, or we can easily become defensive when we say, it wasn't my fault. And then we rob ourselves a little bit of that connectivity that could happen when we don't take the opportunity to practice a bit of empathy and saying, let me just put my thoughts on hold. We're not negating it and saying, no, I don't have a thought or I don't have a feelings that I need to express. You do, but you're just saying, let me just exercise some patience and put this on hold for a moment so that I can listen, so that I can try to understand, so that I can try to experience from your side what it's like. And in doing so, when you give someone that gift of empathy, you're legitimizing their humanity. You're saying, fellow human being, I want to know what it's like. I think we're equal in this, and I can at least in some way try to imagine what it must have been like when you were on the receiving end of of this conflict. And that's a beautiful thing. It's so critical for us to be able to make that connection in conflict resolution that enhances and paves such a beautiful path for us to see the conflict diminish and the bonds of our connection strengthen. And that is when you try to understand someone's point of view, when they feel like that you're really listening. Oh goodness, listener, this is it's a really beautiful humanity affirming moments where they feel like they're seen and acknowledged. Here we've covered some beautiful elements of what conflict resolution looks like, especially through the lens of integrity, and more importantly, how it enhances our experience in integrity. Conflict resolution, let me say again, I believe is the primary way for us to grow in integrity. So this is a fantastic thought that what we're inevitably already experiencing is the very vehicle and means for us to grow in our integrity. You have daily opportunities in the midst of conflicts that come along and arise in your way to grow massively in your experience of integrity. It reminds us, number one, to know ourselves and to own our own stuff. Who are we? How are we wired? How can we be aware of our own challenges so that we can take responsibility and accountability for them? It reminds us to have courage when conflict arises, courage to be able to acknowledge and say, something just happened here. Let's talk about it. Let's address this. That takes tremendous courage. It's not comfortable for many, and it's possible to grow into that. Let me tell you, I once was on the other side thinking, I wish I had the courage to do this, but I don't. The more you practice little by little, the more you grow in this courageousness to be able to face conflict and to deal with it. It constrains us to be respectful, to be fair, to be honest, to be respectful with those that we're trying to figure conflict out with, to be fair in the way that we're addressing the conflict, to be honest in the way that we're experiencing it, and to be honest in also acknowledging their perspective. And encourages us to have empathy, which is such a beautiful, beautiful, magnificent characteristic. To be able to say, what was it like to be on your side? I want to hear, I want to understand, I want to experience what it was like. I'm going to put my desire to share on hold so I can give you that courtesy, that benefit, so that I can understand. And usually there's epiphanies that come up. Recently I had I think I was sharing recently about a challenge at work with one of my employees that I was thinking I'd have to fire because of some conflict that was arising between them and myself, and I think it's legitimate, like the reasons for why I was moving towards this track. There was just a breakdown in communication, and finally I just had the owner of the company sit down with me and this employee, and one of the biggest insights from that meeting, as the owner helped mediate between the two of us, I had to help the employee understand, because they had some concerns that they never actually communicated. And I had to remind them, saying, I want to hear your concerns. I want to hear your ideas. I want to hear your perspectives. But when you hold me responsible for things that are in your mind without actually communicating them, that's unfair. Like, it's not fair to me that I don't have access to what you're asking me to attend to, because I don't have access to your mind until you actually put it into words and communicate. Communication skills are so important. So how can we communicate our concerns and conflicts? And then the other thing that it gave me an insight into is that, there are different perspectives, and I didn't have empathy until I understood, until I heard his story. And I was like, okay, I'm willing to extend now that I understand. And so that was really helpful for me. Conflict resolution is so critical for enhancing and boosting our integrity. And it is the primary means, I think, that our integrity grows. But it takes courage. It takes courage to face conflict. That's the beginning place. It takes commitment with our integrity to be respectful, to be fair, and to be honest in the way that we're engaging. And it takes also empathy to be able to say, in the midst of this, I know there's two stories here that I'm having to attend to. There's mine, and then there's theirs. And by the very nature that we are equal in our humanity, how can we now experience this in a way where we can be collaborative in our pursuit of seeing a resolution to this conflict? Dear listener, I hope this has been a helpful video to enable you to have some skills that you can work on in resolving conflict, which we all experience. It doesn't have to be painful. It doesn't have to be destructive. I can tell you from some years now of experience in dealing with conflict on various levels that there is a way that we can acknowledge this is part of our human experience, and yet it can be a beautiful part that lends towards strengthening and bolstering in beautiful ways what we experience collectively as human beings. If you're enjoying and benefiting from this theme of integrity in its various nuances today, of conflict resolution with integrity and how it boosts and enhances it, I would love to hear from you. I would love to be able to invite you to join me as I make this journey in life with a commitment to not only living with integrity, but also inspiring integrity. I would love to inspire you. I'd love to encourage you to walk alongside. I'd love to have your insights in my life, as well as you share in comments down below how this has been affecting you, how you've been growing, what kind of things you want to hear more about. I would love to hear all of that. If you have not already done so, please subscribe. Please like what you are enjoying here, because that's how we continue to gain our momentum on this platform to find more individuals like ourselves so that we can create community whereby we can inspire and continue to encourage each other onwards and be a catalyst for others to join us as well. Thank you so much for your time. I look forward to our next video. Chat soon.